I've just begun the recording, so for those who could not attend live, it will be recorded for future viewing. So before we get into it, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, particularly most of the Brisbane speakers. We meet on Meanjin land, and I would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I acknowledge that they are the traditional owners of the land and that sovereignty was never ceded in this country. So a quick overview of the event. The main part will be the debate. Hopefully it'll go for around 40 minutes and we won't go over time. And then we'll have a Q&A. So if you have any questions or queries, please put it in the chat, or you can press the raise hand option to say it in person and I will unmute you. And then we'll wrap it up with contact details and any other future events or any promos our proactive speakers would like to advertise. So a quick overview around this topic. There are two big topics and sometimes they are misinterpreted or misunderstood, or there may be cases where people think that they know the overall facts when it could be misinterpretation of data. So climate change is a naturally occurring process. What we're experiencing now is called anthropogenic climate change. So that is climate change that has been impacted or intensified by human factors, and this has imbalanced many of the Earth's natural systems and even our own human systems. So this is supported by around 97% of publishing climate scientists who endorse the data proving that climate warming signs are occurring, and it will test the resilience of many eco and human systems. So if you want more information, you can check out this link. I will be sending this slideshow to you via email if you've signed up on Eventbrite. And any questions about this, obviously put it in the chat box, or you can ask our speakers right after this. So about gender equality or gender inequality, it is a huge topic in itself, which I am still learning actively in. I know many of our speakers are still learning actively in, and I don't think it's something that you can just be an expert in just like that. It is known and recognized as the fundamental human right towards equal access to education, healthcare, decent work, representation in political and economic decision-making processes for women and men. And in this case, we're using the noun of women with an X and men with an X to be as inclusive as possible to gender plural identities. This is actually a new word that has come into the dictionary, I think as of late last year or this year. And it is an attempt in the English language to be more tolerant of, or less tolerant of sexist-based words and pronouns. So according to the World Economic Forum, it will take 217 years for the economic gap to close between genders, particularly between men and women. And many of the negative impacts of gender-based discrimination and exclusion have carry-on impacts on the life stages of those affected, such as access to a high-paying job or an equitable paid job, or even shelter, equitable healthcare. And you can see these things playing out currently with the current public health crisis of COVID-19. So hopefully that gives you it's a very brief overview of two big topics. But I did want to stress that a lot of people do tend to confuse that climate change is only occurring now. Climate change has been occurring for millennia. It is natural. We as humankind have intensified its natural processes, and it's therefore affecting us in many different ways. Which brings us to the debate. So this is a chance for our speakers to unmute yourself, and if you'd like, quickly introduce yourself. Probably starting from Beatrice first.
Hi everyone, my name is Beatrice. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I study political science, sociology and global development at the University of Queensland. I work for the One Woman Project, which is a youth-led organization dedicated to ending gender inequality through intersectional feminism. I'm a state facilitator in the in-school workshop series there. My areas of interest within gender inequality is analyzing gendered violence in minority communities and how this is or isn't reflected in government decision making. My second area of interest is cultural sustainability and conservation within South and West Asia, as well as how migrant communities celebrate, invest, and share these cultural experiences and processes in diaspora countries like Australia.
Awesome. Lachlan?
Yeah, hi. My name's Lachlan, or Lockie. I'm the education coordinator for Sea Shepherd Australia here in Brisbane. I've been part of the environmental movement. I classify myself, or I call myself, a conservationist. I've been a conservationist for probably 3 years, but part of the environment movement as a whole for about 5, 6. I'm in my third year of a Bachelor of Politics, Philosophy and Economics at UQ. And I have a particular interest in philosophy, in environmental philosophy and ethics, and broadly the philosophy of marginalization. So, feminist philosophy, how all the dynamics that go in that way from a philosophical perspective. But yeah, so I'm also, sorry, I'm the environment officer at UQ for the UQ Union, and the UQ Union Environment Collective is co-hosting this event. We're very grateful for everybody else who's working with us.
Awesome. I've minimized my video screen, but I think it's Tia who's next.
I was hoping to go after Nav.
No.
My name is Tia Goldstein. I always find this part a little bit difficult to kind of describe in 3 minutes, two sentences, who I am and what I do. So I currently work, my passion is around building more entrepreneurs that are focused on creating impact and using their business as a method of change, as a tool for change. I build educational frameworks for universities, accelerator programs, and businesses to be able to facilitate that. My particular interest is actually around technological tech companies and creating more impact tech companies, so companies that are using technology as a method to solve sustainable development goals. My background is in community economic development, business, and outdoor education, and I have 3 passports, and I like crocheting unicorns in my spare time, and that's about all I have to say at the moment.
And last but not least, Nav.
Hi, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. My name is Navdeep Pasricha, and above all things, I am brown. Now, I was hoping somebody would laugh, but everybody's on mute. I forgot about that. Apart from being brown, I wear 2 main hats. The first main hat I wear is I am so privileged to have an insider's view of the epidemic that's happening in our education system. You know, teachers are really the people who shape our young people, who shape lives and hence shape a nation. I know it was my teacher that saved my life when I was suicidal and things like that. And not a lot of people know that teachers actually have double the rate of burnout in this country. 1 in 5 teachers leave the profession in their first 5 years. And the amount of teacher suicide is ever changing, ever rising. So a lot of people don't know about this. And that's why I'm really privileged to wake up in the morning and work with teachers on their well-being, because it was my teacher who saved my life. And you got to ask yourself, who's supporting the supporters? So that's the first step, the first hat I wear in terms of teacher well-being and educator well-being, supporting the supporters. And the second hat I wear is, I'm so blessed, I helped start something called the iYouth Foundation, And what we do is we run weekly events, which is a bunch of young people helping the community. This is from working with disabled people, taking kids from the special school to the gym, working with elderly people to end self-isolation. And it's all about how can we make volunteering made easy. we've served now 25,000 people in 10 countries, and it's really exciting. I got to meet some cool people like Tia and yourself and Beatrice along the way. And my pronouns are he, his, he, him. Yes, his.
Yeah.
These are my pronouns. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I forgot to introduce myself as well. My name is Ishara. I am your event host. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am also one of those people that don't know how to self-introduce themselves in less than 2 sentences. But I will say that I'm someone who's very involved with networking and connecting with people who strive to make a more sustainable world for us to live in. So I am deeply engaged in things related to legal geography or sustainable development. And one of those reasons is how I got involved with IMPACTR and bringing you this event. So thank you for the speakers for your self-introduction. So we'll get right into the debate. First question is, do you think anthropogenic climate change exacerbates gender differences in society?
What are your thoughts, Beatrice?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I think, yes, definitely. The climate crisis and gender, I feel, are inherently and intrinsically linked to each other. Gender liberation is inherently connected to the liberation of the natural world. We can understand this through value hierarchical thinking and oppositional dualism. Both concepts are rooted within Western political philosophy, and other cultures do have these concepts, but I say Western political philosophy because due to colonization and imperialism, these specifically Western understandings of these concepts have been the catalyst to a global adoption. So due to inherent foundation within value hierarchical thinking, which is essentially just understanding that certain groups are inherently more valuable than others, and oppositional dualism being that it's a process understanding that social and cultural binaries exist. An example of this is the gender binary system, seeing that there are only 2 genders, men and women, who are binary opposites to each other. And we know that this is false. Gender binary is a social and cultural construct, and rather there's actually a spectrum of gender and a plethora of gendered identities. And again, this process, we can see it in the natural world, is replicated there. You see humans and nature as with oppositional dualism, and like gender, there's more value placed on one end of the binary than the other. And this leads to ideology that humans can dominate the natural world. And yes, and like Ishara said, like, I want to apologize to begin with talking in binary terms. So when I do speak about women, I want to encompass as well non-binary identities. And I also hope that that actually just highlights a little bit of the limitations within ecofeminist discourse for its lack of intersectionality, and a lot of genders fall out when we don't include the non-binary systems. Anyway, women make up 51% of the population, and yet in the developing world, they hold significantly less land than men. So women don't have the same access as well to cash, to credit structures, in order to buy essential goods and seeds for agricultural development. So women are also limited by access to education and outside funding, co-ops, and cultural restrictions, which leads to women actually being more susceptible to environmental and climatic changes. And if you look at this deeper, if you don't own land or you don't have access to cash or credit, a drought or a flood will hit you so much harder. You might lose access to areas that you've been farming, or you might not even be able to replant for the season or the next season, or you won't even be able to recover from that drought or flood. This is known as the agricultural gender gap. And we need to close this gap in order to reduce emissions. And currently, women make up 45% of the agricultural workforce in developing countries currently. So because of these factors that I've just said, women on average produce significantly less crop yields each year than men in terms of the same amount of land. So this doesn't imply at all that women are they're not as capable as farmers than men, not at all. But actually, if we were able to provide women with the same resources, there's research saying that we would have 30% more crop yields, and 30% may not seem like a lot, but that's, with 30%, you're able to feed 150 million people. So, and here's where the carbon emissions drop actually plays a part. So currently half the world's population is underfunded or as well in actively repressed areas that could be providing agricultural resources. This leads to pressure to expand farmlands in order to sustain people, which leads to deforestation, and which is the largest drive for human emissions, one of the largest drives for human emissions. So in my opinion, there is no doubt that these inequalities and these injustices, such as gender and the climate, are inherently linked to each other. But I want to emphasize they're also connected with other forms of inequality like racism, like classism, ableism, and colonialism. Yeah.
Awesome. Who wants to add on to that?
I think there's nothing much more to say there except for yes, really, to what Beatrice is saying. I guess I could expand on. I mean, I don't know that I could expand on it, but I can tangent it, I guess, with some stuff. So as I was saying before, I'm a representative of Sea Shepherd. We're a marine conservation organisation, so my thinking almost always comes back to the ocean and ocean ecosystems, and you know, the point here that climate change has that intrinsic link, as Beatrice was saying, to gender inequality, to racism, all of these things is you know, I view it as this system that's been built up with almost a pure value, almost purely valuing the instrumental, the exploitative value of everything. If something cannot be exploited, if it cannot be sucked for every little bit of, you know, if it can't be transformed into resources usable by humans or perceived, you know, given value by us, then it isn't valuable to us. And I think it's if you look at it from, you know, from the philosophical perspective, it's built up. That is to a T, you know, I say patriarchy or capitalism, neoliberalism, that for me, all those terms are linked because they're all based on exploitation, right? You know, Sea Shepherd identifies 3 primary threats to the ocean in the current world. And that's climate change, clearly plastic pollution, and our main focus, and our focus that's been for very, very many years, is overfishing and illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing practices. Which sounds, you know, when I say it, you know, that this isn't fishing, you know, going down, keeping 1 or 2 whiting that are undersized off the bridge. This is, you know, people collecting massive amounts, you know, destroying whole ecosystems with one fishing trip, you know, with dragnets, these sorts of things. I'm not going to go into obviously the details of the intricacies of that, but it's an excellent example of exploitation. And, you know, in many countries, and it almost always is happening in the developing world, in places, you know, in low socioeconomic countries on the coast of Africa, where people almost have to turn to these illegal fishing practices to get somewhere, to make some money, to feed their families. In a society where that happens, it's exactly the same. The ocean is our life giver. And if we treat the oceans like that, why not treat our mothers like that? Yeah, obviously, I'm a bit poetic there, but I don't think I can go into any more of the intricacies than Beatrice already has.
Awesome. And does Tia or Nav want to add anything?
All good, but thank you. Tia. T-Dog.
Oh man, I kind of like, I think that, thank you, Beatrice, for giving me a university lecture in one 5-minute thing. I mean, the reason why I feel, my short answer is no and yes. Okay, so
Please elaborate.
Whoa. Kanye in the
First
building.
of all, one of the things that I'd like to do is I'd actually like to bring things down to a level, right? So one of the things that I think can be extremely complicated is that when we're talking about climate change in general, and when we're talking about gender differences, and when we're talking about society, I don't know if I can even pronounce that word very well, Anthropocene. I think that one of the important things around all of this actually has to do with simplifying the concepts that are involved. Because when we're talking about climate change, and when we're talking about gender equality, and when we're talking about the things that are happening, I think that what it is doing is increasing divide and raising more awareness around the vulnerable parts of our society versus the haves versus the have-nots. And you can divide that in terms of gender, you can divide that in terms of income, you can divide that in terms of a whole bunch of different perspectives. And one of the things that I think is actually important is not necessarily debating whether climate change is exacerbating gender inequality or gender differences in society, but rather how can we find a pathway in for people to be able to unpack this situation, feel like it actually impacts them, because it is very hard to find, unless you live in a country where you can specifically see the impacts on a day-to-day basis, then it is much more difficult for you to feel the impact of it and to actually to care. Right? I think that we are all in Australia, I am assuming, all 4 of us that are on the panel, all 5 of us, we're in Australia. We are in homes. We all have running water. We all have access to food. We all have access to a whole bunch of other things. And for us to be able to debate this on an intellectual level is one thing, but I think that it is just as important to be able to bring it down to a level of like, well, what does this actually mean? And let's take apart all of those big words that everybody's using and just say, like, in bottom line, what does this actually mean? And why should I actually care? And I think that that's something that is, that's something that I'm more interested in, because I feel like, yes, of course climate change is exacerbating gender differences in society. It's also exacerbating a whole bunch of other things in society. That's not the only thing. That's my 3 cents.
Thank you so much. That is actually such a good segue to the next question, which I think is really important to understand. If anyone takes anything from this session, is that it is more than just about gender differences, as Tia said, and as Beatrice had mentioned about gender binary and all the different intersections of a very intellectual speech. So, again, there is increasing academic consensus and even societal consensus in some cases that we can't collectively help to solve the climate crisis if we don't also address social, racial, and/or gender inequalities. Do you agree with this or disagree with this? And if so, what challenges are you making a difference in?
What challenges are we making a difference in? What does that mean?
It could be, if you're in the space of climate education, for example, that is a challenge in itself. How are you making a difference in the lives of other people in education, for example?
Does that mean what issues are we working towards resolving?
Yes, which is a challenge. It's never easy,
yeah,
so
cool.
I guess you could start from there, Nav.
Yeah, cool. Well, I might touch upon the last question as well. Just adding on to what Tia said, there's a really good saying that...
Can't do that.
Huh?
We've moved on. You can't do that.
It's a debate. We're fluid. Relax. So that was a challenge. Right? Get it? Okay, so what I was going to say is there's a really great saying that a confused mind does not buy. A confused mind does not buy. And if you're thinking about it, we're living in a world where there's so many things grabbing for our attention. There's so many challenges, should you say, Ishara, so many issues out there, so many things that want our eyeballs on them. And so if we're hoping that people will buy in to think Sea Shepherd is important, or think that environmental activism is important, or whatever is important, it's really important to remember that a confused mind does not buy. And so if we can make sure that, you know, I actually have to Google two of the words for that first question. If we can make sure that on a general population sort of thing, things are easy to understand, it increases uptake. The second thing I want to add is, you know, the question of does human-made climate change exacerbate gender inequality? I'm just wondering, like, we all know that bad climate change is bad. We already know it. Whether it affects gender equality or not, it's still a bad thing. So, like, I think that's been settled. I think we know gender equality, climate change, bad climate damage is bad. Now a focus on the solution. And so your question was, do you think we need to change the way we're doing things? Yeah, I think we need to change the way we're doing things. And I'm pretty sure that's what question 5 is all about, right? In terms of the everyday things we can do. You did just ask what challenges have we come across. The big challenge I've come across is definitely that there's it's not simple enough, and people who are really passionate often talk to other people as if they would be as passionate straight off the back. So there are a lot of issues in the world. The one I'm really passionate about is education. Does that mean I care about climate change? Yes. But do I care about it to the level at which I care about education? No. So if somebody comes and talks to me, wants me to buy in, to get on their side, and talks to me as if I'm as passionate as they are, it already creates that level of disparity.
Yeah.
It's very important to meet a person where they're at. And so that's definitely a challenge I've come across. You got to understand, right? You open up your newsfeed and you're being sold to. If you're just another person selling something, then you're just another ad. So it's important to be able to meet a person where they're at. You know, when you see like a ad on, you look at an Instagram post and you know it's a sponsored post, you're like, oh man, this is nonsense. Kim Kardashian doesn't actually use that skinny meaty, you know? So you got to like have that cut through, which I think is a challenge a lot of activists face. How do we cut through all the other noise?
I want to, can I jump in?
Yeah, of course.
It's a good challenge.
Yeah. You know, I think, thanks Nav for that. That's good. So the question that you have is basically the second question that we're supposed to debate has to do with like that climate change is, what was it again? It's increasing academic consensus that if we don't collectively help solve the climate crisis, if we don't address social, racial, and gender inequalities. I mean, I kind of feel like this is, this is it's kind of like saying, what would be a good example? I just finished teaching my class at UQ, and one of the topics that I was teaching was systems thinking. And when we think about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which for those of you that don't know, it's 17 goals. I like to think about it like, I'm a little bit of a space geek, so I like to think about it in terms of like the United Federation of Planets, where everybody has agreed on what the future of the universe will be. And these are 17 goals that we are all working towards that would make the world a utopian place. And the thing about the 17 goals is that they are all individual, but they are all interconnected. So when we're asking, and the world in general is, everything is interconnected, especially when we're talking about wicked problems, which is the problems such as climate change or gender inequality or the problem with oceans, or the problem with gender fluidity, or not a problem with gender fluidity, or the lack of awareness around gender fluidity, or whatever it is, we seem to be able to think that we can approach these issues coming from a perspective of linear thinking, and coming from a perspective of, here is one marker and here is another marker, and these markers don't have anything to do with each other. But in reality, oh look, they do. They all work together, right? So we are all part of a system, and we have to learn how to think as a system, and have to learn how to interact and view things as a system that has interdependencies, and that has unexpected and unprecedented results that are going to happen as a result of it. So we are human beings, and if I was to, like, our bodies are very complex systems, and if we think about if we use that same analogy of like, well, I'm going to cure my headache by taking an Advil, instead of thinking about, oh, maybe let's think about what is the actual source for me having a headache. It could be environmental. It could be the fact that I had something to drink. It could be the fact that I didn't drink. It could be like, there's a plethora of different reasons for it. So approaching it from a systems perspective versus approaching it from an individualistic cause and effect perspective, I think that's one of the shifts that needs to happen. I rambled a little bit.
No, that's perfectly fine. In fact, I encourage it. Lockie or Beatrice, do you have anything to add?
I have something, I think maybe a little bit controversial, but but I would take it further. I would say, and I think Lachlan touched on it briefly, I would say that capitalism is actually the overarching cause of a lot of global inequalities that we see today, and that are reflected on the UN sustainability goals, such as gender equality, racism, classism, poverty, the global division of labor, just to name a few of them. But what we need, I feel, is a radical and dramatic shift to more sustainable governance systems. And it is possible, because we are seeing some of these processes happening now, I feel, with the COVID-19 pandemic. Some shifts that we were told would be so crippling, or we would need so much time to deploy, are now happening overnight. Capitalism began hand in hand with the Industrial Revolution, and you can see it in the data and the data that shows a climate shift since this time. Personally, I believe that within Western political philosophy, we will not find solutions for sustainable development. Even within Marxist or socialist approaches, we would not resolve these issues in regards to sustainability, and as they stem from colonialism and these ideas of domination. The reason I include socialist ideologies within this is because it is still founded within Eurocentric ideas, and socialist states have acted as settler colonial states. And you can see this in examples with China and Tibet, China and East Turkestan, or India and Kashmir. Both Marxist and capitalist view the land as a natural resource that we can exploit. And for capitalists, it's for the personal gain for the individual, where for Marxists, it's for the good of all. And these philosophies are concepts from colonial projects, and the solutions and amelioration projects for many global inequalities will not come from the sources that created them. Rather, I feel we need to turn to Indigenous and Eastern political philosophies to begin to create solutions. And when I say, and I want to emphasize, I say solutions, not a solution, because there will never be one solution, and there won't even be one solution for one country, rather a series of small-scale grassroots solutions in order to work towards a more intersectional and more sustainable approaches. But in order to do this, I cannot emphasize it, but we need more, but we need to prioritize Indigenous voices. And I really want to take the time to recognize the link between Indigenous Australians and the climate and the environment, they've been the custodians of this land that we all are living on today for 120,000 years with the latest archaeological data. So we need to reevaluate ourselves and our positions situated within Western ideas growing up with them, and critically consider whether we are the most innovative, and reevaluate ourselves. Are we really smart? Are we really smart enough that we will outsmart the planet? And we will be able to continue these processes of subordination? I feel we need to take time to learn from our own Indigenous people who have protected the land for a lot longer than the settler colonial state of Australia.
So okay, so I agree and disagree with a lot of what you're saying, right? So I'm all for being able to like take a look at I understand the difference between Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy, and the difference between, you know, from when you think about like creation myths and the creation myth of Judean, Christian, Islam, which has to do with separate from, versus other creation myths which have to do with being a part of, right? External to versus being internal to. Let's look at the current situation. We keep on going back to, and please understand that I have had the honor of working with Indigenous populations. I completely, I have a deep understanding of, I have a basic understanding of this, okay? I don't think that anybody who is not from that culture can actually come and say, hey, this is what I think you should do. But let's take a look at those statements that you made in terms of we have to take a look at the Indigenous practices, and we have to bring them into where we are today. Let's take a look at the current situation of where we are today. How many people are living on this earth?
I don't know that answer off the top of my head.
Many billions of people, right? When you do the very simple thing, the simple math of like, if what you are doing is you're comparing a way of life that existed and a type of thinking that existed within a much smaller population, where the planet was able to sustain the population, and there was an ability to be able to create harmony between the living system and the population itself. Versus now, we are in a situation where we can no longer sustain with the current resources that we have. So being able to live with the land and to come from a place of trying to find solutions that are outside of the box, that come from us being a part of, I think that we're no longer at that space anymore. I mean, I am the biggest hippie and the biggest tree hugger on the planet, but I think that that's unrealistic, right? I think that when you think about the small, you know, it's interesting, one of the classes that I teach is sustainable leadership for sustainable enterprises. And we talked about like, why is sustainability important? And everybody's like, oh, sustainability is important because of, and everybody used a big difference, like all these very nice language about, well, it's needed, and hope for the future, and better, you know, because we need to be kind to each other, and empathy, and all the rest of that stuff like that. Great. When I asked them, what is an action that you are going to be able to do in order for you to be able to move closer to, let's say, I don't know, giving up eating meat. How many of them do you think raised their hand and said, oh yeah, I'm totally going to do that? No, not happening. So when you're trying to make, and also please understand, Beatrice, that I grew up in Israel in a collectivist society, okay? So I grew up in a type of environment, in a type of intentional community where it's collective decision-making, where it's, I am over that. I think that at this point, what you actually need in order to be able to make a much stronger change is actually more of a benevolent dictatorship that has a very specific and very authoritarian way to be able to make people, you can't, if you have people trying to choose between A and B, people are always going to choose convenience over a hard choice. That's part of the human nature.
Yeah.
That was my rant.
No. I'm really interested in that. Did you live in a kibbutz in Israel?
Similar.
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to say is, I feel that I'm not saying to live off the land at all. And I feel that we tend to give to a lot of other political philosophies or ideas of organization a very a static role, so they're allowed to develop. But when we talk about Indigenous philosophies, we look at them as something that is left behind, and this is like, and it is because we grow up in a society that has colonial frameworks in which we work within. But I believe that what I'm talking about is when you can consult and you look at Indigenous ways of connection to land, a connection to community, to people, and how all those processes work together, not as separate individuals or separate processes, but as a collective. You come up ideas with for land management, such as New Zealand giving waterways human rights. These are the sort of like processes that come from that.
Yeah, those are two different things, right? And what I understood from your argument, what you presented, was two different things. One is I completely agree. I don't think that it's Indigenous versus Western. I think that it's just being able to look at things from a perspective of understanding that everything is interconnected. And instead of thinking linear, instead of thinking of let's expand more, let's create smaller circles that are closed loop systems that are able to sustain that specific community, that are like hives, right? And that when you change your question, you change the frame in which you're actually looking at something. So that's a different perspective, rather than what I understood to be the other one. But let's move on.
Does anyone have anything to say?
Does someone want to add anything to this dynamic?
Ishara.
Yes.
Can I ask you a question, Ishara?
Sure.
I know I read it obviously in the briefing and before agreeing to be part of this, but just considering what we've done so far, can you just clarify why is IMPACTR putting on this event, number one? Like, why do they go to the effort to put through it? And number two, if your audience could walk away with one thing from today, what would it be? So that way I can gear my responses and such.
Yeah.
Because there's so many ways we could take this.
So I am one of the Brisbane ambassadors for IMPACTR, and essentially this event, which was supposed to be held last month, but because of the developments of COVID-19, it had to be switched online. And originally it was just going to be video submissions. I wanted to create a live event debate like this because essentially IMPACTR wants to create a platform where we can have debates around such topics from diverse perspectives. IMPACTR is a global sustainability tech startup or social enterprise, and this is one way to build up a base of perspective and debate and narrative, just as you've seen. So your second question is actually one of the debate questions, and I feel like for those who are listening, please know that these questions are also based on countless articles and a lot of frequently asked questions from experts or expert material. So all of this debate that you're seeing is from people who have different lived experiences and who are also geographically based in different areas. If you are offended by anything, please don't be offended. These are all opinions by each of our speakers. And the whole point of this event is to provide debate. And I'm loving it. I hope you are as well. So in interest of time, I'm going to go to the next question.
So the purpose of this debate is to give people food of thought from different perspectives.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Awesome.
So I'm going to switch to the next question. And it is around the narrative of how many INGOs and even some scholars are saying we need to start to step away from the business as usual narrative. If you have experience or perspective in this area, how do you think businesses can incorporate socially and environmentally conscious policies or decision-making processes?
I can start with a little bit here. My experience in this area is taking direct action and advocating for organisations to develop a corporate social conscience, or obviously on a personal level as an activist, but also organising on behalf of Sea Shepherd. Now, Sea Shepherd's got a few campaigns in Australia. The one I mainly want to touch on for this, because it's been our most successful in this area, is Operation Jeddah, which is part of the Great Australian Bight Alliance. So it's all about stopping the drilling of oil in the Great Australian Bight, which is something that's been floated by a few different organisations. And what has stopped that up until now, we have managed to knock out not just Sea Shepherd, but the whole alliance has managed to knock out BP and most recently Equinor. They've taken away. They've withdrawn their applications to drill because of people power. And I know it's such a generic term, but grassroots activism and getting people's voices out there has never been more important. It's never been more important, and it has actually never been easier as well, living in the age of social media and everything. Obviously, there's nothing like a good old-fashioned chaining yourself to a tree, but not everyone can get there. I've been on the front line up at the Galilee Basin. Obviously, that's a fight that's still going on against the Adani coal mine up there. But there's, and I guess I've just read the question again, and I'm actually not touching on it at all. Sorry, Ishi. Okay. But my message for this sort of this is encouraging business and encouraging the corporate private sector to step away is all about grassroots activism, at least from my perspective and from my experience. It's all about making sure that the paddle out movement against Equinor's drilling in the Bight was huge, and it was very powerful because you had all these people with a vested interest in the ocean, surfers and other recreational beachgoers that have recognised they find, in many cases, for many surfers, especially ones I know, they see the intrinsic value in the ocean. They see the intrinsic value in biodiverse ecosystems, especially in the ocean. They know that value, and then they know what's at risk. If there's an oil spill in the Great Australian Bight, it spreads to Sydney. That's what the modelling by BP, by Equinor, actually, that's what it shows. So everything is at risk there. And when people understand that, then they're encouraged to take action. I think it goes right back to that point that I think everyone has made so far about the boiling issues down for people, making it digestible for people. If something, climate change will affect us all eventually in one way or another. This obviously much more tangible than some others, but I'll leave it there.
Adding on to what Lachlan said, I think Lachlan said it so well in terms of how BP and the other one recognize that there's a huge risk associated, a financial risk. And it reminds me of what Richard Branson said. I think, until going green is green, like on a profit loss statement, it means it provides a profit. It's very hard for a big corporate to lean themselves that way. And I think there are three great examples. Ishara, your question was, what have been ways that businesses have included policies to become more sustainable? And through my research, I found three main ways I'd like to share. The first way has to do, get my notes out. The first way actually has to do with the supply chain. So I'll give you an example, right? Unilever, which is a very big conglomerate, they found that just by changing, instead of having different bottle caps for their different bottles, they saved 2,000 tons of plastic a year. This is pretty crazy. So that was their supply chain. And part of it was what Lachlan was saying. They understood that if there was a natural disaster near one of their plants, it would actually cost them around $300 million. So now they had a fire underneath their bum to do something about it. The second thing would have to be around CSR. CSR, corporate social responsibility, investing in green projects and such. But the biggest thing I would say is marketing. So, studies, especially with millennial generations, show that if a company at least positions itself as a sustainable brand, then their attractiveness to millennials goes up exponentially. So this is definitely a way that they can use as a point of difference. So for example, Bank Australia is very, very hectic and explicit about how they do not fund projects that have to do with, with things like natural gas, with things like coal. They don't fund things that fund the arms industry. And so they use that as a marketing thing, which is really great. Companies, basically, if you can tell a company that by being sustainable and by marketing that they're going to make more money, which company would not be excited? Because at the end of the day, something I also think is really interesting, right, is people say that, in politics, because you're only on a 4-year term, that's not enough time to do anything substantial, because you're always going for the next election, right? So interestingly, if you're running a publicly listed company, the time frame is even shorter, because you have investor calls every single quarter where you have to report on, X, Y, and Z. You have to report on your profit and all that. So I think it's really important to take it as a journey, but this is an investment we're doing, which will yield return, not immediately, but it'll yield return in this long. Does that make sense? So maybe your mom and pop investors might not be so interested because they're hoping to sell out their shares in a shorter time frame due to they're older. But if you're talking to a younger age of investors, it definitely makes sense for a company to say, this is a long-term investment we're making, which will reap returns and make us competitive, and hence draw up the value of your share price. So to nut it all down, I think it's important to understand that a CEO of a public listed company, their responsibility is to get as much bang for the buck for their shareholder. That's like their big thing. And so if we can find ways that they can do that are green, that's freaking awesome. And I think it also does, we need to sort of indoctrinate them that long term it'll get them more profit, which is their KPI. Yeah. Tia, I can feel your lips bursting with
I mean, it's kind of what I teach, right? So
we used to teach it together, Tia. Don't you remember? Come on.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's 2015.
So I just shared I just shared a document that has a really interesting it's a picture that has really interesting typology around different types of sustainability. So I want to talk about 3 specific things, and I want to be really short because I know that we're short on time and there are 5 more questions to go through or whatever. So number 1, I want to bring attention to, I'm older than everybody who is here on this panel. I'm like old. And when I don't know if you remember, but in old times, you used to say, hey, I have a gay friend, or hey, my best friend is gay. Whereas now the conversation has shifted to, I don't even talk about your sexual preference because it is so accepted and it is no longer something that is interesting to anybody. The same thing, if you can use, and when you think about certain trends in the way that things are incorporated into society and incorporated into the way that we act and the way that we believe, you can look at sustainability from the same thing. Now, I have a very close friend who believes that you can either rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic or you can build a different ship. And she is all about building a different ship, and I say that I'm building a bridge between the Titanic and that new ship. Because you have, really what you have in Australia is probably about 10 years behind the rest of the world in terms of the definitions around sustainability and how businesses view and value sustainability in general. So when you look at the fact that Nav, I'm sorry to highlight, the fact that you're still using the word corporate social responsibility, for example, is a very clear indication of where the thinking is in terms of what the role of business is and how business is using sustainability. Generally speaking, there are 2 different ways to think about sustainability. One is in terms of the fact that that there are existing organizations that are trying to incorporate sustainability into what they do, and you can do it from a from a push perspective, which is really sustainability 0.0 or 1.0 if you look at the picture that I put up there. And that has to do with more of a compliance perspective. So I'm doing it because there's compliance that is coming in around environmental sustainability. I'm doing it because there's compliance that is coming in around legislation for human slavery, for example. And then you move along the continuum and you see that there are companies and businesses that are doing it because they understand in the marketplace, whether you want to or whether you don't want to, we still live in a capitalistic society that measures success based on economic progress. So therefore, being able to meld, to first of all, to see the trend that is happening from a business perspective and from a consumer perspective about the fact that people are demanding more aspects of, however you want to call it, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, triple bottom line, PSR, whatever it is, people are demanding more of that. And you can see that very clearly in the evidence of just by having, for example, an organic section at Kohl's, right? That wasn't there 10 years ago. And the fact that we are having this debate about climate change and gender diversity or gender equality, and the fact that we're talking about different types of businesses is evidence to the fact that it is slowly becoming more popular in our language. So you have the typology, you have the different types of businesses that are slowly shifting, and then you have the new generation of business, which is the generation that I work with and the generation that I'm extremely passionate about, which is the whole debate around social enterprise, social entrepreneur, impact. Like, screw all of that, take that out, and understand that as a business, whatever business you are developing, whether you were developing a new business or whether you have an existing business, you are going to have to incorporate the concept and interweave the concept of profit and purpose into everything that you do. And you can argue how you want to measure that, and you can argue what the way to do that is, but the fact that that is a new way of the way of doing business will slowly permeate into the way that we interact and the way that we think and the way that we purchase and the way that we develop businesses.
Awesome. Does anyone want to add on to that? If not, we can go to the next question. No? Awesome. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna merge the last part of question 3 together with question 4. And this is the second last question, which really asks the panelists about, a lot of the stuff that you've all just described can be overwhelming for people, especially those who don't come from those backgrounds. So, what are small everyday steps or actions that people can take towards being more conscious about sustainability or conscious about certain issues that you're also passionate about, or generally just about being more sustainable and practicing sustainably? Anyone want to take the?
I'm pretty good. I'll do a really tiny bit. Obviously I do a lot of school talks for Sea Shepherd and to varying ages of school kids, and I could just be like, do the whole make sure you don't accept your straws and your drinks and all that sort of thing. But I don't think I need to do the whole reducing your personal waste and all that sort of stuff, environmental. I think my whole philosophy around the environmental movement, around the whole conservationism, environmentalism, just stay informed. I know it sounds so silly and it sounds so, but try and keep on top of everything that's changing all the time in the movement that you're interested in. But, and then take little easy actions when you can. And I include voting in that. We recently had a council election here in Brisbane, or in Queensland, had their local elections recently. And I talked to a few people. I talked to one person in the Moreton Bay Regional Council and one person in the Brisbane City. And both of them said a very similar thing. I don't want to vote because it's just local government. Doesn't really make a difference. I'm too scared to get out there on voting day because of the pandemic, which is admittedly a far more acceptable response in that. In Brisbane, Brisbane City is the biggest local council in Australia. People don't recognise that. There's a whole lot of green space within Brisbane City Council, all through the, even in the inner city, through the Paddington Barton area, up, Mount Cootha, all sits within Brisbane City Council. All stuff that's that needs to be protected and needs to have a council that protects it. Moreton Bay Regional Council sits on a marine park. There's a lot of waterways in there that run straight into the ocean, straight into a protected state marine park. These things are things that people don't consider. Even minor public works projects, minor infrastructure projects can shift river systems, can shift ecosystems. And as we were saying before, I think Tia was describing it, in a more societal level, systems. But ecosystems, you change one thing, and you can never predict what that thing will change by the end. So if you stay informed, try and play a part in the democratic process. We have an absolute privilege here in Australia to be able to do that in the first place. So try and chip into that when you can. But the main thing is, stay informed. Get really angry. If you're not angry, you haven't been paying attention. That's one of my favorite lines.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Lockie. Does anyone want to add onto that?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Beatrice, go.
What I wanted to add to that was, I believe we don't have enough intersectional conversations and a dialogue around gender and around the climate crisis, and how these different intersections bring in climate, gender, and race, how they bring in climate, gender, and indigeneity or class structures. So what I personally would advise to everyone, I always say this, and I have 5 steps always, if you want to engage with more diverse conversations and with more diverse perspectives in order to look at different solutions that can encompass more people. We can't have conversations about climate solutions without thinking about the most vulnerable people in our communities. So with that, I say, number 1, you should always actively listen with intent to the struggles and the marginalizations that people have experienced. Ask how you can help. Advocate when nobody is watching. Advocate, be an ally, and do it when it's inconvenient for you and when it's unexpected of you. Always fight for the least represented in your communities, and analyze your own privileges, begin to deconstruct them, and then mobilize your privilege when it matters. So those would be the 5 things that I would say everyone can do with themselves. You can journal one day, analyze what your privileges are, but those are the 5 things I would recommend to everyone to do.
Wow.
Do you want to add to that, Nav or Tia?
Yeah, I have, I don't know if I have a list. Those were great. Thank you. So 2 things. One is for people that are activists and that are very deeply involved in this, and that have very strong feelings around this. The number 1 thing that I would say is actually take an approach of meeting people where they're at and do not come across as being judgmental. I like to call it the vegan argument. How do you know if someone's vegan? Don't worry, they're going to tell you. And that is not that is not something that is inviting. It's something that is very accusatory. It is something that raises a lot of. It does not invite people in. It does not provide a space for learning. It does not provide a space for engagement. It does not provide a space for civic debate, for civil discourse, for actually being curious and understanding how this works and what is it. So that would be the number 1 thing that I would say for people that are already advocates, that are already very immersed in it, is do not come from a place of like, hey, how can I invite you in, rather than you are doing things wrong, because of you, the world is going to end, right? Number 2 is from a perspective of people that are interested and people that are potentially here on this platform. I would say that 2 things. 1, don't think that, a lot of times we think that, well, I'm just one person and therefore I don't matter, and what I do doesn't matter. And I would say that that is incorrect, because you have to understand the difference between your circle of control and your circle of influence. And your circle of control is what you can control in terms of your actions, and your circle of influence is the different elements that you can influence in your day-to-day life. And from small things, big things grow. So the first thing that I would say is be curious. So really find out what is it that you care about, and find out what are the different things that are potentially aligned with the things that you care about. And find one specific, like, divide your focus, divide your results. Nav is being very honest. He's like, I mean, gender diversity, that's great, but really what I really care about is education, and that's what I'm passionate about, and this is what I'm focusing all of my time and effort towards. And hey, there's going to be a snowball effect and a halo effect that is going to come from all of that. So from the people that are wanting to get engaged, be curious about it. Find out what you care about, and find your pathway into it, whatever that might be. Even if it's just by starting off, you have to understand that all of this, like, you think that we know what we're talking about? Hell no. We're really on a learning curve in terms of what I knew last week versus what I know now. And when I talk to businesses, when I work with businesses around being able to incorporate this into what they're doing, we're all on a journey of discovery, and it's all, every single day, it's something new. And we have to start from where you are and understand that you have to have a growth mindset, and to the fact that you will get to a different part if you just continue with the small steps of being curious, being in alignment with what you are passionate about, and finding your expression of it, and understanding that your voice matters.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tia. Nav, do you have anything very quickly I might add on to this?
Very quickly. So it's interesting how, Beatrice and I thought similar in terms of having a list. Some things that a person can do to be more sustainable is 1, not engage in fast fashion. 2, avoid plastic wrapped foods. 3, have at least 1 non-meat meal a week. And 3, check out the banks that don't fund non-sustainable stuff. So 3 banks that are really good at that, I don't get a payment from them, is Me Bank, Bank West, and Bank Australia. Me Bank, Bank West, and Bank Australia. That's the first thing. Also check out if your thing has a buy one, give one model. Yes, it's not perfect, but it's something. And there's also, like, if you're, my partner taught me that especially females have a lot of, like, products they use to take care of their hair and stuff like that. So if you check out a company called Hot Tresses, they're pretty fabulous. Like, I don't know what the term is, but, like, beauty supply company that's all ethical and vegan and stuff like that. And the last thing I'd like to add to what Tia was saying is it's really important to understand that just because you are totally exposed to something does not mean that people in your, not inner circle, but the other circles are as exposed. So I'll give you an example, right? Tia, for a long, long time, I imagine, would have had the knowledge of how businesses, even small businesses, can have practices which increase their sustainability. And I remember late last year, she started this workshop that was about that topic. And to me, I was just so bewildered. I was so sad I couldn't make it because I was overseas or something. But I was so excited. I was like, oh, finally, I care about this, but I don't care about it enough to Google it. But now somebody in my inner circle is bringing it up. I want to be involved. So if you care about something, share a post, make a 4-minute summary, because although the message has been shared before, the messenger counts just as much. Although the message has been shared before, the messenger counts just as much. Because let's be honest, anybody could have Googled sustainability practices and come up with 100 million results, but you decided to invest your time to be on this interview, to be on this debate, to be on the Zoom call, because the messages had some interest to you. And so I'd say if you're not producing your own content about little things people can do, at least share other people's. So I YouTube searched top 5 YouTubers on sustainability, and one I really enjoy is called Shez Bisley. So I check her out. Now here's the thing. If I was not prompted with the question, what can we do? I probably would have never Googled top 5 sustainable YouTubers. So if you can expose things that you find that help to your wider audience, it makes a difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just in the time, I'm going to say, if you could, my mouse is gone. say one thing, and for our listeners, this is again content warning about mental health. If you don't want to listen to this part, you can leave or mute this. But if you could say one thing that you're doing, you know, based on the context that, you know, the sudden changes that need to happen and that we are currently facing has changed the way that we go about our day-to-day, how we work, or, you know, how we're studying at home, for example, and how it has an impact on our mental health. What action or actions do you think are necessary for yourself or you actively practice to have a better headspace?
So I wrote down the 3 R's, Ishara.
Mm-hmm.
The first R was reframe. Reframing in that whilst it does seem like a pandemic now, there's probably been people you know who have had a lot more suffering. For example, my grandmother was a refugee, half her family got killed, she had to flee, as opposed to stay inside and have some economic downturn, you know what I mean? So the first thing is reframe. The second thing is regain control. One of my favorite sayings is that being a victim was not your choice, but being a prisoner is. And so there's some, you know, you should go through the stages of the morning, but if this is going to be a 6-month thing, ultimately it's up to you to make the most of it or not. Yes, you do need to get your house in order first in terms of finances and such, but there comes a point where that will be in order. And so I understand the struggle till then, and I do come from a privileged background. But once you get to that point, then it's how can you make the most of this? And the last one is a rigor. Fear and stress, Ishara, are those chemical patterns in your body. Mm-hmm. Cortisol and adrenaline and things like that. So if you can add some rigor into your life, how can you be so rigorous in your exercise, so rigorous in your movement, so rigorous in your intensity that you actually shake the fear away? Because at the end of the day, it's just chemicals. And don't be fear's bitch. If somebody's confronted by them, they needed to be. They needed to be confronted because you know, being fearful of it will not actually add to the outcome of getting out of it. It's important not to be held by fear, but rather dance and make sure that you are the leader in the dance that you're having with it. So there's 3 R's: reframe, regain control, and have rigor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to add?
I'd like to add on to that as well.
Oh, go.
Okay.
Right, so did someone else want to add?
No, go.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so for me, I believe there's 4 things that we need to incorporate, and that's self-soothing, self-care, community care, and structural care. So I feel that when I say self-care, like it's kind of like these days I feel like it's really a blanket term that like do this, have a nice bubble bath, put on a pink clay mask, like everything's fine. Like, I don't want to like diss clay masks because I have a really unhealthy like addiction to them, and my collection is way too big. It's a whole problem. But there's a difference between self-care and self-soothing, and these things don't actually stabilize you or create opportunities for you to really progress. So self-soothing is like activities that that's your face mask, bubble tea, some nice fresh flowers. But self-care is activities that provide a context for meaning, and they support you and they help you grow as a human being. So that's taking the time, go to therapy, eat well, set healthy boundaries, take ownership of your finances, napping, and that's a whole other topic that I could go into forever and talking about, like give you a post-colonial analysis of why napping is really important and why I refuse to like deprive my body of its needs for a system that owes an immeasurable debt to my ancestors. But anyway, moving on, we have then community care, which is helping to create systems that our current systems of governments like capitalism haven't, because they don't inherently support care. And this is workers' unions, dignified healthcare organizations, Free Cycle in Brisbane, co-housing and child education collectives. But we need to take it further and to recognize that harm reduction is only one part of the solution, and we need to fundamentally really rebuild our system that we've all been speaking about today. And this comes in the forms of ensuring that all our workers have living wages, and we have paid family leave and paternity leave, and efficient and free public transport for everyone, environmental protection, identity freedom. And these things are, all of these processes are all intrinsically connected together. And in order to look after our mental health and have a better headspace, we need to do a combination of all of these processes in order to look after ourselves and to look after other people.
Awesome. Does anyone have anything else to very quickly, I might add?
I'm going to say two things.
Yeah.
One is I have created this little thing that is called From Little Things, Big Things Grow. It's a jar. I know it's hard to see because of my background. And in the jar, every single day, I find little things that I have done that I will put in and celebrate my small successes, because I think that in today's environment where it is extremely difficult to be able to predict what the hell is going on from today to tomorrow, you have to celebrate really small wins. And if small wins for you are getting out of bed before 9 o'clock, fucking A. If a small win for you is eating a healthy meal, bloody awesome. If it's doing 15 Pilates classes in a week, amazing. But every single time you have a small win, writing it on a piece of paper, putting it in the jar, and at the end of the week, I go through them and I celebrate my small wins.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Lockie, do you want to add anything, or do you...
Oh, look, I'm a simple person, I guess. If you got to look after you got to look after your mental well-being. Simply find something you love and try and do it as much as possible. And that goes for, now in the pandemic. Find something you enjoy. Ideally, it's something that isn't too engaged or isn't too, it doesn't even necessarily need to be working towards something. Sometimes I do, you can actually read for the sake of just enjoying the book. It's something I've forgotten through studying. But but even when this whole pandemic situation passes eventually, and we all get back to our hardcore activism or hardcore, we've got messages to get out there. We've got lots of work to do, and there'll be more work than ever after August or whenever it is that we'll eventually get out of here. Mm-hmm. Just take a little bit of time. Let your head do something. I'm going to go straight to the beach. I'm going to go scuba diving. I'm going to get as far underwater as I possibly can. But try and do something that you enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We do have a little bit of time for any quick questions, but if you do want to contact the speakers or follow up on any organizations that they've mentioned, there are a couple of links here. Please don't worry, I will be sending this slide deck to everyone who's attending on this live debate, as well as those who are listening to the recording afterwards. So if you've registered on Eventbrite, I will be sending an email after this with the recording of this debate. If you do have any feedback or want to inquire about anything, send me an email. There is an upcoming webinar hosted by IMPACTR on April 15th. This is on urban neighborhoods development towards sustainability. They've advertised it on LinkedIn. And for contact details of our speakers, they are here. But if you have any questions or comments, please put it in the chat, Zoom group chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak your question.
Speak your truth, young one.
Speak your thought. I love it.
We fill them with information.
My brain is dead. I always find it when shifting to online teaching is really challenging because you have a group of students, and a lot of times they don't have the internet. It's not fantastic where they are, so all you see is names and yourself, and you're talking to a screen. And when you say, hey, anybody have any questions? There's like dead silent in the room, and you have no idea if if they are listening or whether they're happy, they're unhappy, or
Dude, yeah. Hey, Ishara.
Yes.
Is the founder of IMPACTR in the house, Johanna? Is she in the house?
I'm not sure if Johanna is in, but one of the...
Hey,
there she is.
Johanna's in the house, man.
I haven't tested my video, so I hope I look all right.
Yeah, you look fine.
You look lovely. I love
Hey
you
guys, that was amazing. Thank you all so much. Yeah, like Tia said, it's like, woof, the brain is definitely got to work out. But yeah, I really appreciate like the super, like the big spectrum of like very sort of academic, philosophical, and then also like down to the everyday relatability. For sure with IMPACTR, like we're trying to give those small bite-sized entry points. Like I've written down Tia's jar as like really important, because people tend to have that feeling like, oh, it's too big, climate change, gender equality, like how can I participate in that? But it is through, if many people do one small thing, then you're getting a big collective impact. So yeah, just that's not a question as such, more of a comment, and to express some gratitude. So thanks for a really engaging session.
Awesome.
And hi from me. Yeah.
So I am conscious that there's a bunch of people on this call who are actually from different time zones. So thank you all for attending, taking the headspace to commit to coming onto an online event. It's definitely a different and challenging time for many people. So thank you all for attending. I will still be on here until 7:30, like when it ends. But if any of you have any comments or anything, or want to express your gratitude or send some kind of riveting question to one of the speakers, feel free to do so. If you have missed it, I'll mention that I will be sending the recording as well as Tia, the file that Tia had sent in the chat. I personally can't see it in the chat because I'm hosting this, but I will send it via email as well to everyone who attended and everyone who couldn't attend the live debate but will be listening afterwards.
A big thank you to Ishara for hosting the panel.
Ishara.